To understand George Eliot's Middlemarch, it helps to first imagine a web. The novel isn't just a series of stories, it's an attempt to map how every person in a small provincial town is connected to everyone else through invisible threads of debt, marriage, gossip, and shared history. Set in an English town during the early 1830s, the story takes place during a time of massive change, as the old ways of the landed gentry collide with new scientific ideas and political reforms. At the heart of this web are two very different people, both searching for something more than the life they were born into. First, there is Dorothea Brooke. She is a young woman of intense, almost overwhelming intellectual and spiritual hunger. She doesn't want a life of shallow social graces, she wants a life of profound meaning. When she looks at the men around her, she sees people who are too small for her ambitions. There is Sir James Chetham, a kind but conventional baronet, whom she rejects because his life seems too easy, too settled. Then she meets Mr. Casaubon. He is an aging, scholarly clergyman who is working on a massive, unfinished theological project meant to explain the origins of all religion. To Dorothea, Casaubon represents the greatness she craves. She thinks that by marrying him, she can become his partner, a sort of intellectual companion who helps him achieve his life's work. She views marriage not as a romantic union, but as a vocation, a way to dedicate herself to something larger than herself. But the reality of marriage is far more stifling than her ideals. Casaubon is emotionally distant and physically declining. Instead of the intellectual partnership she dreamed of, Dorothea finds herself trapped in a lonely, quiet domesticity at his estate, Lowick. She is surrounded by the heavy, dusty silence of his studies, and she begins to realize that the greatness she sought is actually just a man's private, obsessive, and somewhat failed ambition. As Dorothea struggles with this disillusionment, we meet Dr. Tertius Lydgate. If Dorothea is searching for spiritual meaning, Lydgate is searching for scientific truth. He arrives in Middlemarch as a modern, ambitious surgeon. He wants to change the way medicine is practiced, moving away from old superstitions toward rigorous scientific observation. He is a man of high ideals, but he is also a man who underestimates the power of social standing and debt. Lydgate's life becomes complicated when he falls for Rosamond Vincy. Rosamond is the town's social ideal of grace and beauty. She is charming and highly skilled in the ways of polite society, but her motivations are quite different from Lydgate's. While he wants a partner who can support his professional ascent, Rosamond wants a husband who can provide the high-status, comfortable lifestyle she has always envisioned. Their courtship is a dance of two different sets of expectations. They marry, but the foundation is shaky from the start. Lydgate's scientific pursuits are expensive, and his social position is precarious. As the years pass, the threads of these two lives begin to tighten. In Dorothea's world, a new figure enters, Will Ladislaw. He is a cousin of Casaubon, and he is everything the stuffy Middlemarch social circle is not. He is spirited, charismatic, and has a certain modern, unconventional energy. As Dorothea helps Casaubon with his affairs, a subtle, unspoken connection develops between her and Will. It isn't just a romantic attraction, it's a recognition of two people who don't quite fit into the rigid boxes of their society. However, Casaubon is a jealous man, and he becomes increasingly suspicious of their closeness. He tries to exert control over Dorothea's future through his will, attempting to ensure that she remains tied to his memory and his legacy. Meanwhile, Lydgate's professional life is being pulled apart by the very social structures he hopes to transcend. He becomes entangled with Mr. Bulstrode, a wealthy and powerful banker who is a pillar of the community. On the surface, Bulstrode is a man of immense piety, but he is actually a man with a dark, compromised past. Because Lydgate accepts Bulstrode's influence and financial support to help fund his medical ambitions, he inadvertently enters a web of scandal. As the narrative moves forward, the town of Middlemarch is rocked by a series of crises. We see the ripple effects of debt and reputation. Fred Vincy, Rosamond's brother, is a well-meaning but financially irresponsible young man whose gambling debts threaten to ruin his family. This forces the industrious and hard-working Garth family to make massive sacrifices to help him, showing how the failures of one person can weigh heavily on the lives of many others. The tension reaches a breaking point when the secrets surrounding Bulstrode come to light. The truth about his past and his connection to a disreputable man named Raffles is exposed. This scandal doesn't just destroy Bulstrode, it pulls Lydgate down with him. Because Lydgate was seen as Bulstrode's protégé, he finds himself socially blackballed. His professional reputation is tarnished, and his financial stability collapses. The tragedy of Lydgate is that his downfall is largely a result of his inability to see the reality of the world he lives in. He thought he could pursue science in a vacuum, but he was actually part of a social web where reputation is a form of currency. As his money vanishes, his marriage to Rosamond turns into a state of mutual resentment. Rosamond, who cannot adapt to a life of struggle and diminished status, remains focused on the appearance of wealth and social standing. They become strangers living in the same house, isolated by their own unmet expectations. As the story reaches its final movement, we return to Dorothea. Casaubon has died, leaving her a widow and a woman with a complex inheritance. She has had time to grieve, but she has also had time to think. She realizes that her marriage to Casaubon was a mistake of idealism, and she finally acknowledges the truth of her feelings for Will Ladislaw. But this realization comes with a heavy price. To marry Will, she must defy the social expectations of the town and potentially forfeit the inheritance that would provide her with security. She has to choose between the life of a respectable, wealthy widow and a life of modest means with a man who is seen as an outsider. In the end, Dorothea chooses Will. It is a decision that prioritizes her own integrity and her heart over social standing. She chooses a life of meaningful, if quiet, activity. The novel's epilogue shows us the long-term results of these choices. Will Ladislaw eventually finds success and becomes a member of Parliament. Dorothea finds fulfillment in a life of motherhood and quiet social influence, working through small, private acts to improve the lives of those around her. Lydgate, by contrast, meets a much harder end. He dies young, having spent his life struggling against the debts and social failures that his marriage and his associations helped create. Rosamond is left to live a life of comfortable, but ultimately superficial, social stability. She has the status she always wanted, but it is a hollow victory. When we look back at the whole structure of Middlemarch, a few major themes emerge. One of the most famous ideas in the book is what Eliot calls the unhistoric act. Throughout the novel, characters strive for grand, sweeping changes. Casaubon for his theological monument, Lydgate for his scientific revolution, Dorothea for a life of profound spiritual significance. But the novel suggests that much of the real work of making the world better happens through quiet, everyday actions. It happens in the way people support one another, the way they show empathy in small moments, and the way they maintain their integrity when no one is watching. These acts might not make it into history books, but they are the very fabric that holds society together. There is also a constant tension between appearance and reality. We see this in Bulstrode's false piety, in Rosamond's obsession with social performance, and in the gap between Dorothea's idealistic visions and her lived experience. Eliot is interested in the ways people hide their true selves behind masks of respectability, and how those masks eventually slip when faced with the messy realities of debt, scandal, and death. The novel also explores marriage as a social and intellectual contract. For Dorothea and Casaubon, marriage was an attempt at a spiritual vocation, but it failed because they couldn't bridge the gap between their individual obsessions. For Lydgate and Rosamond, marriage was a social and economic arrangement that collapsed because it lacked a foundation of shared values. The book asks us to consider whether a marriage can ever truly be a partnership of souls, or if it is always, to some extent, a negotiation of social and economic needs. Finally, there is the concept of the web itself. Eliot's characters are never truly independent. Every decision one person makes, whether it's a banker hiding a secret or a young man gambling away his sister's money, vibrates through the rest of the community. This creates a sense of profound interconnectedness. It suggests that we are all responsible, in some small way, for the social environment we inhabit. Middlemarch is a book about the struggle to live a meaningful life in a world that is often indifferent to our highest ideals. It doesn't offer easy answers or fairy tale endings. Instead, it offers something perhaps more honest. A recognition that while we may not all achieve the grand, historical greatness we dream of, the quiet, purposeful lives we lead still matter. As the novel concludes, it suggests that the legacy of a person is not found in the monuments they build, but in the subtle, unrecorded ways they have influenced the lives of those around them.